Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Today's guest is Tara Conklin, author of Community Board, published by Mariner, and it was released just a couple of weeks ago. So Tara's also the author of The House Girl, which was a New York Times Indie Next book at our bookstore. Her second novel was The Last Romantics, which was the pick of book clubs everywhere, again, including ours here at the shop. She teaches at Hugo House and works with private clients as well, who wish to hone their writing skills at whatever literary level they might be. You can fill in her form on her site for more information about that. So my daughter, Katie, lives in a gated community in Ormond Beach, and she sends me messages posted on her town bulletin board, and we laugh for hours. Here's some. I see McDonald's on Granada has closed. Does anyone know why? Response was, I went by today and it was open at lunchtime. And then here's one, update. I saw a gypsy this morning. Unfortunately, I have no flowers or nectar for her. And the response, hopefully she'll find some soon. And then later, I'll feed her in the morning and release her after she has had breakfast. And the other one is, which is just like the book, it's pretty rude to allow your dog to bark continuously for 25 to 40 minutes every time you put him or her outside. There's a dog barking ordinance. I suggest you read it. Who is the you? Contact him directly. Well, if I knew which one it was, I would, but I don't. And then there's a picture of this dead spider, and someone writes, does anyone know what kind of spider this is? So Tara and Community Board, and the title frames the book perfectly, reads these all the time, not just the ones in the book, but those that people like me send her. And I would like to say hers are funnier, but they're all so insane. I mean, who does this? It's like road rage. You wouldn't bully a little old lady one-on-one, but you're happy to run her off the road if she's driving 10 miles under the speed limit because she's blind and can't see over the windshield anyway. So, to the point, when your husband leaves you for no good reason and then barely says goodbye, where do you go? You go back to your parents' house in Murbridge. Well, where are your parents? And your Fern, Fred. And so the hijinks commence with loads of wonderful, zany, and comically evil characters. And my wife was really mad at me in bed and on the plane because I was laughing out loud and continuously as I read the book. She got very annoyed. But now she's going to read it. So here to explain how she could be so funny and so, not instructive, but so able to give us a slice of what our lifestyle has become in America, an affluent America now. So welcome, Tara. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, so as a bookstore owner, I'm always interested in three things: the cover, the title, because that's why people buy your book, and lots of times, for me at least, the epigraphs. So talk about the cover, because I know you love it, and I love it too, because it contains pretty much all the elements of the book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I love the cover. Originally it was more of like a total toile. I hope I'm pronouncing that word correctly. And then it just seemed a little too busy. So we kind of narrowed it down to just key images from the book. But it's in this sort of, old-fashioned toile style, then juxtaposed against the neon pink of the title and the text, which is super modern. So that kind of goes at this theme that runs throughout the book, where these kinds of disputes or these kinds of neighbor relations have, in any community across time, you have these, conflicts and these ways that people are trying to get along. And this book looks at a very modern day version of that in the year 2019. So right before COVID.
And the funny thing about it is that, yeah, it's a great title and people will be attracted to it. But a lot of the people who are attracted to it, including me, are attracted to it because they know exactly what part of it's going to be about. Because it's just, I don't know how the phenomenon occurred and how it evolves, but yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. And then, so the epigraphs, especially the one by Zadie Smith.
Yeah. I mean, I think, that I don't have it right here in front of me, but I probably should have it right in front of me.
So you might as well show the cover of your book.
There it is.
And the color is great, jumps out at you. And like I said,
Yeah.
the little vignettes are almost like cuneiform.
I know.
I
I love the little drones up here.
Yep.
And here's my protagonist, Darcy, sitting on the park bench with Barnum the bird sitting on her head.
Yes.
And the little free library, of course. And there's Fred, the fern, her friend.
Well, going back to the epigraph, let me read it to you.
Yeah.
If you, well, now you have it now.
Now I have it. Yes. Should I read it?
Yeah.
All right. Then you begin to give up the very idea of belonging. Suddenly this thing, this belonging, it seems like some long, dirty lie. And I begin to believe that birthplaces are accidents, that everything is an accident. But if you believe that, where do you go? What do you do? What does anything matter? And that's Zadie Smith from White Teeth. And then the second epigraph is, wherever you come near the human race, there's layers and layers of nonsense. And that's Thornton Wilder from Our Town.
Right. And that really strikes home with me because it's kind of like my life's credo.
Yes, well, it was definitely a guiding principle of this book and kind of the inspiration behind this book when I became kind of obsessed with my own neighborhood messaging app. Then, I mean, I don't know if we can say it, but Nextdoor, which is kind of obvious that that's the one.
Do you ever contribute to it yourself?
Every once in a while, but I try to steer clear for the most part. I mean, I'm definitely a lurker. I mean, I love to kind of see what's going on in the neighborhood. And you are so right. As soon as my friends found out that I was writing this book, everyone started sending me like the best posts from their own neighborhoods, which was very hilarious and enlightening to see sort of the differences that would arise in different parts of the country, but also just the similarities. I mean, there were so many of the same kinds of disputes and same kinds of issues that would, from Menlo Park to Miami Beach would arise.
Yeah. And the thing about the book is that, I mean, this interview, there's so many questions I can ask about so many characters, and we'll go through some of them. And we can't do the post, but my ex-wife has two cats. One is named Beyonce, and the other one is named Rihanna.
Sounds like cats after my own heart. Yeah.
Well, so talk about the post where they talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, pets are a big part of these neighborhood apps. I mean, both kind of annoyances about other people's pets, like the one that you just read, like don't let your dog bark for 20 minutes. And then of course the perennial, who's putting dog crap in my garbage bin, which literally I think every single, next door vicinity has some version of that dispute. And then also lost pets. And that's sort of where Darcy, my protagonist, gravitates to, because she, after spending a few months inside, not working, she needs to earn some money. And so she starts looking for lost pets with rewards that are offered on her community board.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, I'm trying to think what I would give somebody, because as you say, it ranges from a tenner to an amazing $500.
Yeah.
I think if someone found my dog, I'd be so happy. I'd be more than willing to give a couple $100, wouldn't you?
Yeah, completely. I mean, just for the, having to tell my children that I lost our dog would be very bad. So I would pay, I don't know what the value of that would be, to not have to have that conversation with my kids, but it would be a lot.
The funniest series about the cats is, who's shaved the legs of my cats, and also who painted the toenails. Because you think that's impossible. I mean, that's the whole thing about it. You think it's impossible. but it isn't, because as you said, your friends send you ones that are
Yeah.
just as crazy.
Yeah, yeah. No, some of the, I mean, it's hard now for me to kind of think back and reverse engineer a lot of those posts, because a lot of them were inspired directly from posts that people had sent me and things that I had read online. And then I tinkered and changed them depending on sort of the narrative needs of the novel. So it is hard to remember which ones like were actually like, there definitely were some where cats were being, manipulated in some way. Like people were, yeah. And I just thought that that was such a funny idea, that like people would like take in a cat and, comb it or paint its toenails and then release, that it's not their own cat, and then release it back to the owner. But that's exactly what is happening in Murbridge. It's a bit of a mystery who's doing this to the cats.
Well, one of the ones that really, I thought, would I do this, is leaving soup at somebody's door and actually eating the soup.
The good
Which I
little
wouldn't do.
boy.
Well, you and I both practice law, and I practice law down in Gainesville, Florida. And I had a rule that if any client gave me a gift of food, whether it was venison or some type of cake, I would not eat it.
Oh, really? I don't know who your clients were. I don't know. You didn't trust them.
No, maybe you just got better results than me.
I can't say that. I mean, I practice corporate law, so there were no gifts of food, except for maybe dinners at steakhouses, coming my way. But I mean, it's kind of in my little neighborhood in Seattle, around Christmas time, people, leave little treats on people's front doors, and I always eat those. I'm not too worried about, but if it was some rant, like, the soup, I think my kind of vision of that relationship in the book, because there's someone who's posting that wants to leave soup for someone, and then there's a young man who accepts the soup and is very thankful for it. And I think it's like a sort of an empty nester, like a mom whose kids have all flown, and she's feeling really kind of bereft and sad that she has no one to take care of. And so she's looking for somebody to cook for. And then it's this young kind of, I don't know, college student or like just graduated. He doesn't have any money, and like, oh, some homemade soup is on my door, I'll take it,
But he does, the first time he says, it is kind of weird, but I drank it anyway.
But it's good. And here are my preferred soups. Yeah, he puts in an order.
Well, I guess the thing we haven't done, which we are confusing the reader, is go back and talk about the nitwit Skip and give us basically what the book's about, because we're just talking.
Yeah. So the book opens with our hapless protagonist, Darcy Clipper, who is a junior actuary living outside of Boston. And she's been married since right after college graduation to her husband, Skip. And she's about to turn 30. She's 29 years old. She comes home from work one day, and Skip tells her that he is leaving her for a skydiver named Bianca, whom he met at a corporate team building event. And he says, sorry, see ya, Darcy, and packs up his things and leaves. And this completely blindsides Darcy. And she is a somewhat coddled, and I am using that word, I'm trying to be as polite as I can when talking about Darcy at the beginning of the book. She's lived a somewhat coddled life where her parents take care of her. Her husband kind of takes care of her. I mean, she works and she's out in the world, but she's not a fully developed person yet. She's still a bit of a kid. And so this really kind of rocks her world. And she's also, I mean, her profession and just her lifestyle is very risk averse. Like she feels that she's like careful about germs. She's careful about, her relationship. She's careful about her job. So she's lived this very kind of risk averse life. And then suddenly it just implodes. And so after crying, after weeping for 2 weeks straight and having some disturbing conversations with her friends, she decides to take a sabbatical from her job and return to her hometown of Murbridge, Massachusetts, where she expects her parents to welcome her with open arms and take care of her while she, gets over this horrible breakup. But she comes home only to find that they have left the state. They have moved to Arizona to try out a retirement community, and they have not told her that they are doing this. So she is a little bit surprised. And then she decides to stay in Murbridge and stays in her childhood home. And so it follows her over this year of her getting over the breakup and then kind of engaging with her community in these different ways and having a lot of, hijinks.
Her 3 friends give her each horrible, upsetting conversational advice.
Yeah.
And it's so classic, isn't it? Because they have the same insecurities that she has, but they want to try and use her as a foil to cover theirs.
Yeah, indeed. One of them says to her, God, what I wouldn't give for my husband to leave me for 6 months. I could do everything I wanted to do. I could eat all the food I wanted to eat. But then she doesn't want to see her because her husband says that he thinks divorce is contagious. And so she's like, Darcy, we better keep our distance for a while.
Yeah, or else I can't see you because I have so many luxurious.
Yes, that's another friend. Yes.
But then, that's, it's all lighthearted to a certain extent, funny to a certain extent. There's a lot of angst in it, but part of it is almost like Kafkian, like with Mr. Castro. And you can tell what Mr. Castro does, but the part that really got to me is why he offered and why he reneged, because it's the moment where he puts his hand on her shoulder.
Yeah, he offers her, he remembers his own breakup. He's at first very sympathetic and says, Darcy, you can take time off and take the 6-month sabbatical and I'll have your job waiting for you. He puts his hand on her shoulder, and then he is remembering his own breakup and the horrible woman who broke his heart. But then later he sends her an email and says, actually, Darcy, if I'm offering a paid sabbatical to everyone who has a heartbreak, then I'm not going to be able to stay in business anymore. So good luck to you. And he ends the terms of their agreement. And unfortunately for Darcy, she had nothing in writing. It was just a conversation that they had, a very informal conversation. And so she's sort of left in the lurch.
Yeah, left in the lurch and also almost penniless, which gives rise to a lot of the crux of the story.
Yes. I feel like financial pressure is very rarely, a lot of fiction these days, I feel like involves characters who are either, at a kind of heightened professional level or, have money in some other way. And they don't really get into sort of the nitty gritty of how are you living? How are you supporting yourself? And I really wanted Darcy to be kind of an every woman in a certain way. I wanted her to really have to wrestle with these, very pertinent everyday questions of, how am I going to feed myself? How am I going to live? And so that's kind of the boost that she needs to get over her emotional withdrawal from the world. She needs to engage materially with the world, or else she's going to starve to death.
The thing about her parents is some of the things they say, once again, you think are impossible, but they do say them they gave the Fern Fred away, and also that they're stealing the Wi-Fi and the cable, and things like, have you been bludgeoned? But then I can hear my ex-in-laws or my mom saying things like that too. At first you go, no, that's impossible. No, it's just, she's making it up. But those are things that are said.
Yeah. Yeah. And her parent, I mean, she's an only child. Her parents have really protected her and spoiled her entire life. And her mom is a worrier, which I have a dad who's a worrier. So, and I'm sure many people listening have one or both parents who are worriers and are always, wait, did you read that article about, the eye drops? Like there's this thing going on with the eye drops. And I cannot tell you how many times my dad has sent me information about the eye drops. I'm like, Dad, I don't use those eye drops. I'm okay. I'm like not using eye drops. Like it's okay. But that idea that like, your parents, even when you're well into adulthood, are just kind of thinking of things that could potentially harm you and trying to warn you about them. Like Darcy's mom's big warning at one point is, don't put anything down the garbage disposal. You don't never put your hand down the garbage disposal. And so I think, even though I did like this book, I pushed the envelope quite a bit in terms of the actual ways that people would communicate. Like the bludgeoning thing. I mean, maybe perhaps like the 12th time that she mentions bludgeoning, like, but I think, I mean, I did that obviously for comedic effect, but the kind of the kernel, the crux of it with having this very worrywart kind of parent who's overprotective and, and has created and has helped to create Darcy, who is herself very fearful, and just kind of showing that dynamic and how the mother-daughter play off of each other, I think has a real truth to it.
And you make it even funnier because her worry about bludgeoning is not really a point, it's a line, because Mrs. Petsker, when she knocks on the door, also implies that there's the possibility of a bludgeon.
Yeah.
There's Tupperware. Who has 17 Tupperware bowls anyway?
Lots of people have Tupperware. Yeah. So Mrs. Petzner is her boyfriend, her high school boyfriend's mother, who Darcy's mother asks her to check on Darcy because she's worried about Darcy. And she leaves Tupperwares full of blondies that she bakes on the porch. But she never actually gets a glimpse of Darcy until the very end of the book, because Darcy does not, under any circumstances, want to face her ex-boyfriend's mother at a time like this, personal crisis.
Yeah, and because of her funk, she really doesn't, for most of the book, want to face anybody, including the UPS guy who's taking pictures. Yeah, so she's in this funk. She's lucky enough to be getting the blondies, and also the fact that her parents, the warriors, have prepared for the nuclear eventuality. So I don't mind Chef Boyardee. I don't think anyone else in my family would enjoy eating it, but I kind of like it.
Chef Boyardee and chickpeas. Yeah. I mean, that's what sustains her during the first kind of quarter of the book, before she ventures outside. She's living inside in quarantine. And this book was really, I mean, I wrote most of this book during COVID, and I really wanted to look at sort of the circumstances that were happening to me and to my family, my friends, and the emotional and mental toll of that. But I didn't want to actually write a book about COVID. So that's why I set it in 2019. But Darcy goes through a lot of the same kinds of things that we all were going through during that first year of COVID.
And because she's in that situation where she needs to get money, you paint a picture of her that's really absurd. And that's why it's so funny. Just like Thornton Wilder's epigraph is, her clothing, what she wears, and then when she goes out, it becomes the kind of pet whisperer that she can find. it's such a sight. You have the whole thing envisioned in your head.
She is a pet whisperer, you're right. But she's still she doesn't want to really face anyone. So she wears like a gaiter over the bottom half of her face, which is, that's what we all were doing, right? Like none of us were, we all were covered up with masks and like crossing the street to avoid passing someone. She does that in the book. So I was just taking all of these little things from the COVID era and putting them onto Darcy and just kind of seeing what it did to her emotionally and what were the like psychological reasons why she was doing that, without governmental orders and, quarantine rules.
It's funny because maybe already from my interaction with you, you might know how I am in certain social situations. So I'll walk into a doctor's office and I know the receptionist, the first thing I'll say is, "You're still here? They haven't gotten rid of you yet?" And when masks were on, I wasn't sure anymore whether they thought that was funny or whether I was insulting them. I'm able to peg people. But then I realized something beautiful is you could tell whether people had laughing eyes or not. Did you ever notice?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, you can, but I wouldn't recognize people. You don't realize how kind of anonymous, the masking was, and how you really like, you can tell, I think if someone was really laughing, you could tell, but the more subtle, communication markers and emotional markers were really difficult, I found. And also there were a couple people who I met only during COVID. So I'd only known them with a mask on. And then when they took the mask off, it was, one of my youngest son had a tutor who I only had seen with a mask on. And the first time I walked into the house and she was not wearing her mask, I didn't know who she was. I was like, who's this person in my house? And because I had like filled in the rest of her face in my imagination. And it was very different than what she actually looked like. So it was kind of funny.
Yeah, I found it sometimes a pleasant and sometimes an unpleasant surprise.
Yeah.
And the good thing about it was I never recognized anybody, so I had the perfect excuse. I was like, oh, that worked really well for me.
Yeah.
But we're trying to sell your book, so we got to go back talking about it. But so we talked about Mr. Castro, we talked about Skip, we talked about Janine and Stan.
Marcus. You want to talk about Marcus?
Yeah, we've talked about Bianca. I love when her parents say things like, "It's a very nice lesbian couple," because they have to say lesbian.
I know. Yeah. I mean, they are people of a certain age, and and this is something on the community boards as well, is that there is a whole lot of subtly veiled and not so subtly veiled racism, xenophobia, just all sorts of phobias are coming out in this, not really anonymous space, but this virtual space where, I did find that people would say things that they would never say face to face, but somehow on this board, this virtual community board, they let it rip.
Yeah, it's like, would you ever walk from door to door saying, "Would you like to buy these sneakers? They're slightly used."
I know, it is hilarious, some of the things that, and the sock, like one sock, lots of life left. That actually,
no,
okay, one of the real ones. I'm almost positive that was a real one, and that just totally cracked me up. Yeah, but it is hilarious what the things that people are trying to sell online.
One of the things that Darcy does what she doesn't do and I do is she writes a lot of these draft emails that she puts in her outbox to Skip and other Yeah, to skip mostly. My problem is I usually just click send.
Yeah.
I've learned a little bit to hold them overnight, but I still, if I'm really teed off, I still hit send.
Yeah. Well, she, that's almost those draft emails operated. I mean, narratively, they operated as a kind of like internal, like this was really the deepest, darkest emotional truths of how she was feeling about her marriage breaking up. And so but yeah, she never sends a single one to skip. And it's almost like it was for her almost like a journal, it was like her diary. But I have a tendency, it's funny because when I definitely have a tendency to write emails and then not send them. And looking back, at some of them, I think, okay, that's good that I didn't send that.
Yes, I've been.
Yeah, hold that.
Yeah, that's excellent
Step away
advice.
from the send button.
Well, now I think they have that software. Some of the new operating systems allow you to take it back right away.
Yeah.
You don't
But
know
not if it's already been opened. If it's been opened,
Right.
you're
The other thing that's interesting about the book is there's a second backstory. That's the other thing is you said this is not retirement home, kind of within the community. And there's lots of communities around here that do have like stages. You can go from a home to a condo to an over 55 and then to a assisted facility. And then the last, of course, is the memory unit.
Yeah, exactly. The one in the book it's called the Marian Sisters Home for Elderly Women, and it's all women, and it's more of a nursing home really, but it's run by nuns, the Marian Sisters Convent of Nuns. And one of my primary characters, Fanny Scott, lives there, and she and Darcy become best friends really. And I mean this also during that first initial COVID period, when a lot of first of all, it was, more people in these kinds of facilities were dying at a very rapid rate, and they weren't allowed to see their family. They were being kind of, kept inside and away from loved ones. And so I thought a lot about those kinds of places and older people, and how it wasn't, I think there are a lot of people, well, I'm trying to think of like a sensitive way to say this, but not that like, okay, they lived their life, they're expendable. But I almost felt like that was, it's just in the old people's homes. That was kind of the initial sort of COVID reaction. Let's just close up the old people homes and we'll be fine. And they still have lives to live, and there's still things that, it's just, and maybe this is a reflection that as I'm getting older, I think about this a lot, that every stage of life has its joys and its adventures and its sorrows, and one stage is not more real than another or more valuable than another. And so I really wanted Fanny to, she has her own journey that she goes on in the book, and her own sort of unresolved conflict that I will not divulge right on this call, that she needs to sort of come full circle on. And I really wanted an older woman, like a truly elderly woman, to be a vital presence in this book. Not like a kindly grandmother or she's her own person, and she pushes Darcy in certain ways that Darcy has not been pushed before. And she really helps Darcy, I think, become a more, independent and full person.
There are so many well-drawn characters here, and I always consider them well-drawn when I can actually have a mental image of them. Not that it would be the one in the movie, which this should be, but yeah, yeah, and then like she, who we're talking about, is a kind of mentor. All these people kind of bring Darcy up in a sense by her own bootstraps, but not like. And then there's relationships that develop, like Officer Omar, and
Mhm.
then the third one that's important is Marcus,
Yeah,
because he takes her out of her envelope.
yeah, yeah, he does. He employs her, first of all. So something that's a little more reliable than lost pet money. And he's building this playscape, this big playground at his home, that he's going to allow other kids to use. So he's kind of opening it up to the community. And this was based on something that happened in New Jersey, where a man built this like unbelievable playscape and opened it up to his community. And there was a lot of legal trouble, a lot of unhappy parents. So that was kind of the inspiration behind Marcus's playground. But he, he's going through his own, his husband is very successful. Marcus is a stay-at-home dad to 3 boys, and he's going through a lot of the sort of crisis of confidence and identity that I think happens if you are a full-time caregiver for children, especially if your partner is professionally very successful and outside of the house a lot. So Marcus and Darcy really gel, and they just become best friends. And he challenges her in a lot of ways and gives her something to do that's meaningful, which she really needs, something that's outside of herself and her own, sorrow and navel gazing. So yeah, I love his character. I love their relationship.
Yeah, so do I. I love the way that he holds back sometimes, like when she's using the circular saw or whatever saw it was, and the lines aren't straight, and he's cringing, and she knows he's cringing, but he
Yeah.
just
Yes, Marcus is he's a real perfectionist, and he was an architecture student before he had a bit of a nervous breakdown. And but he's very, very intense, and he feels very strongly about, what he's doing. And in this with this building this playground, this kind of state-of-the-art playground, and he's taking, all of that sort of creative and professional spirit and desire, and putting it into this kind of extracurricular project that he's doing. And and he allows Darcy. It's good. Darcy is good for him because she is not a perfectionist, and so she lets him she like gets him to relax a little bit. And he's good for her because she needs to be a little bit more like focused on, doing things that are outside of herself. So the two of them really kind of play off each other very well.
and with his kids, I was thinking about that too, because, my son's, he's driving them to travel teams, but they're playing different sports, and
Uh-huh.
taking them there. And it drives me crazy because, I'm old. And so, in the morning, my mother let us out the front door, and then she called us for dinner. And then
Yeah,
I feel, like I was guilty because I didn't do all this helicopter stuff. But there's a mixture,
yeah, yeah. Also, it was a different time. I mean, that was the same way my parents, I mean, they, I would just kind of go play with your friends, and I had friends who lived across the street, down the hill, and we would just entertain ourselves, ride our bikes around and go into the woods, and it was great. And you're right, parenting now is a very very different thing, especially in an urban area. I mean, I tell my kids to go outside sometimes and go play with their friends, but they have to stay within my backyard or the neighbor's backyard. So it is, yeah, it's a different thing, but it has to be a balance, because otherwise you get someone like Darcy who has never had to do anything for herself.
Right.
And so I wouldn't feel too guilty about not being a helicopter parent.
It's funny, in our neighborhood, I don't have a neighbor. I live out kind of like out in the woods, but they have the Facebook page. So I never know what's going on, but my wife knows exactly what's going on, which peacock is missing. I said, first thing I always do is, how do you know that? And by now I should know how she knows it, but I still don't. Go, they're selling their house, even that. And I have no idea. How do you know that? And so some guy is building some houses. And I thought, when I saw this, I said, this grammar is wrong. And the sign, it says, stop the build. And it's the wrong, it's the grammar is wrong. Stop the building, or
stop building, stop.
And my wife says it's because of the hashtag, but
yeah, hashtag, yeah, forget grammar with texting and hashtags, and yeah, grammar's out the window.
But I thought it was a one of a kind. I thought, this is my only stop the build. I didn't realize it was a thing until I read your book.
Yeah, stop the builds. That's yeah, the community gets very upset, or some members of the community get very upset about Marcus's plan to build this adventure playscape, and they're worried about traffic, and they're worried about, too much noise. The noise is a big part of the concern, and safety of the kids, but it's really just about noise and traffic and parking. But there's sort of an underlying ulterior motive that the head of the selectmen, which is the town's governing body, which I don't know, are you aware of like the New England kind of select board tradition? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I grew up in a town very much like Murbridge, that Murbridge is loosely based on, called Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And we had a select board, and it's one of those sort of last remnants of true, small town democracy, where you can go to a select board meeting and vote directly on the on whatever issues are on the agenda. And as we learn in the community board posts about the Murbridge Board of Selectmen, the issues generally tend to be fairly boring. Like sludge removal and repainting the parking strips of the library and stuff like that. So not that many people traditionally tend to show up for these meetings and take part in the governing of the town. But then Marcus's Playscape kind of creates this big dilemma and big scandal in the town, and so everyone has an opinion and ends up getting involved and coming to the meeting. And I mean, this was a bit, this is also kind of, if this book has kind of a larger meaning or a larger message, it is about being involved in your community, and whether you want to define that as the school your kids go to, or your block, or your city, or your country, like just pay attention and get involved in some way, because it's important. And if you don't, then other people are making the decisions, and you really, I mean, it's about democracy.
Yeah. And, which brings us to the comically evil villain of our story, who's not that much different than the comically evil ruler, and perhaps again, of our country.
Yes, Jake Sidzinski. His name has no vowels. Jake Sidzinski is my comic villain. And when I was first writing his character, I thought, okay, I'm going to use the same speech patterns that a former president used just to like as a funny and maybe not so subtle nod to the model for his character. And I started kind of really listening to this former president's speech patterns and transcribing, and it was too much. I was like, no one is ever going to believe that someone in public, like, speaks publicly in this way. It was just so over the top. So I ended up not using the same speech patterns, but I used I used a few tricks from his game book.
It's really difficult, and has been for some years, for stand-up comedians, because it's almost, when you can't satirize something, you lose.
Yeah.
And it's impossible. I mean, especially like the NFTs and the pictures in the NFTs. Like, that's not even possible. And then I was in Chicago 2 days ago, and I look out my window and there's this giant Trump. How is that even possible on the building? It's like, and I kept looking at it, and it was like, eventually I couldn't look at it because it was just, it's impossible. It's impossible. And so for 6 years, I've been saying to people, I can't say it anymore because I keep saying you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
So way beyond that, and people are irritated by me saying it anyway.
No, you can. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Idiocracy, which
Right.
is a like brilliantly prescient movie, which at the time, I'm sure, I can't remember the name of the director, but he was probably like, oh my God, this is so funny. This is such, and so much of it seems to have come true.
And beyond.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, we can talk about the drones, but one of the funniest thing in her draft letters to Skip is how Bianca becomes increasingly her suit. And I always wonder whether she really was or not.
Well, I think it doesn't really, I think Darcy is just looking for any criticism she can level at Bianca, and having only studied internet photographs of her, she's pinpointed on her evidence of a mustache.
The way you can really tell this is a good book is because I really am trying not to smile the entire time, but I can't stop it.
Thank you.
But it's true. I just can't maintain a straight face because I just keep thinking of the drone and Officer Omar. It's just
the drone wars. Yeah, that was fun to write. So one of Darcy's neighbors, the one that she's stealing Wi-Fi from, is the Dykstras, and Mrs. Dykstra is spying, so Darcy believes at first, on Darcy and others in the neighborhood using a drone. And so Darcy this is how she connects with the local policeman, Officer Omar, because, well, first Officer Omar thinks that she's a squatter in her parents' house, but then Officer Omar gets involved in the drone wars and is trying to help Darcy kind of get Mrs. Dykstra to stop spying on her. But as you may know, being a lawyer, it's very hard because drones are actually drone behavior is mainly governed by federal aviation law, strangely. So unless there is some kind of like certified either injury or like harassing repetitive behavior, you can't really, it's hard to actually do anything about a drone. So Darcy's a little bit left in the lurch on that one.
In her various relationships, there's always something that gives you an exact idea of what's going on, like for Officer Omar's shoulders.
Yes. It's been a long time since she's, had interaction with a man she finds attractive. And so Officer Omar shows up at her door and yeah, I mean, how can she not notice his shoulders?
Yeah, and then kind of presages, well, no spoilers anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do some spoilers in this. It would really piss you off.
Yes, we won't do that. It's but this book it was really different. It was very different than my previous two books. And when I first started writing it, I just really wanted to write a book that would make me laugh. I mean, it was the midst of COVID, and it was very, we all didn't know what was happening, and we were stuck in our homes, and our kids were remote schooling and losing their minds in kid ways, and we were losing our minds in adult ways, and I just wanted to be working on something that was very lighthearted and focused on sort of the good of humanity. Like, this is a spoiler I'm happy to share, which is that there is a happy ending. I really wanted a book with like a satisfying, happy conclusion. And I wanted something to make me laugh. And so writing this definitely made me laugh. And there were, but I remember sending the first kind of section off to my agent and thinking, okay, I think this is funny. Is she gonna think it's funny? And she did. She liked it. She thought it was very funny. So
yeah, I have this friend, Bernie, and he has a similar sense of humor to mine. So basically, we're just constantly insulting each other. But I find that I don't really think his texts are that funny, but the ones I write back to him, I find myself laughing out loud at. So did you actually laugh out loud when you were writing any of this?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely was like, like the evil professor kind of mixing my cauldron of tricks. It was fun to just, I don't know if I was like guffawing out loud, but I was definitely smiling and giggling at various points because it did make me smile. Darcy's the fern, because she talks throughout the first section of the book and throughout most of the book, but definitely the first section, she talks out loud to her absent fern, Fred, Fred the fern that her mother has sent over to a neighbor's house to take care of while they're in Arizona. And Darcy really misses the plant, the fern, so she speaks to it. And that I actually had a lot of fun with, but it came because of a narrative problem, because I wanted Darcy to be isolated, and I wanted her to kind of cut off ties with her friends and her family. But I still wanted her speaking. I still wanted to hear her. So Fern the Fred the Fern, Fred the Fred filled that kind of narrative problem as well as being kind of funny.
Both of those devices were very natural, that and then the draft letters to Skip, which really set things up. And then her mom's emails to her too.
Yeah. Well, I also, one thing about this modern day that we're living in and how we communicate, and this is one of the reasons why I don't use quotation marks throughout the book. And
that was great.
A couple of people have asked me about that. And I mean, the sort of the thinking behind it was that, how often these days do we pick up the phone and call someone and actually speak to them? I mean, I mean, my teenagers never talk on the phone. Like, they're always texting, they're messaging, they're Instagramming, they're DMing, they're doing this and that. And it just seems like the modes of communication that are personal and that are the most common have just shifted into this kind of freewheeling, grammar-free, punctuation-free texts and messaging. And so I wanted, and it's like this free flowing thing, you know, that you'll be messaging one person on one app and then another person on another app, and then, you know, maybe Zooming with somebody else, you know. So I just wanted to kind of capture that amorphous kind of stew of communications that happens now. But yeah. So I that was why I did it.
Yeah, and at first I thought, this is weird, I'm going to get confused. And then I realized there wasn't one time in the book that I didn't know who was talking.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I tried to have everyone have very distinct voices. So
But when you're talking about the various types of communication, well, first of all, my nephew Spencer, he would used to text me and he would, you know, use 4 for 4 and U for you and KK. And I said, Spencer, you need to put periods and capitals. And he goes, because I'm old. And so he writes back, did you understand what I was saying? I said, yeah. He goes, well.
Yeah, there you go.
But again, my older self is going all the time, no good can come of this.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a different world. And you know, you don't learn cursive in school anymore. You know, I remember like learning cursive handwriting. And my youngest son has dysgraphia, which is like real difficulty writing. It's like dyslexia, dysgraphia. And a lot of his teachers have said, you know, let's just go straight to a keyboard. So he's been keyboarding primarily for the last couple of years, and he's 10. And you know, I don't think it's, you know, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I wish I had learned to type quickly earlier in my life, because now that's pretty much all I do. I mean, I very rarely will write pen to paper. I know some writers who still do, but I definitely prefer typing.
Yeah, the only reason they do teach cursive in some situations, but only for hand-eye motor coordination.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And I remember I was talking to some customer service rep for a big company like Verizon or something. It was obviously a young person. And she said, I'll give you the number to call. And I said, wait a minute, let me get a pen. And she goes, just put it in your notes. So I was running around the house looking for a pen, which are few and far between.
Yeah, totally.
I have my device with me, or I could dictate it. There's so many ways I could put it in there.
I know there's so many, it's almost like too many, you know, like, I mean, I have like my WhatsApp, I have my Signal, I have Instagram messages, I have Zoom, and sometimes I'll forget. I'm like, God, where was that? You know, where was that message, or where was that piece of information? And it takes a long time to find it, going back to various messages.
Well, the scariest and what's become ubiquitous is ChatGPT, which I call it Geppetta because I can't keep saying chat. Well, every time I said, and I'll say to her, hey, Geppetta, when was the French Revolution, whatever? And she'll go, I am not Geppetta, but I can answer your question. She says it all the time. I want to give her a name because ChatGPT is the thing to say.
Yeah.
But I could say to her, write me a short story in the style of Tara Conklin, which I have done for some of these interviews, and it's absolutely amazing. You should try that one.
I almost don't want to.
I know, because I can't believe she writes that way.
Yeah, it is I mean, obviously for writers, it's a little scary. Yeah, it's a little threatening. I mean, I still believe wholeheartedly that there is, you know, a soul and a you know, a meaning that only a human being can give to a story. But certainly for things like, you know, reporting news stories, or, you know, persuasive writing or copywriting, I mean, that kind of stuff, I'm you know, it does seem that might become largely automated.
Yeah, you can't comment on this statement, but I would take ChatGPT over Colleen Hoover anytime. I mean, I've read her paragraphs. I pick up her books and look at a paragraph, and then I rewrite it. Well, this is what you do for a living. Never mind. I can't do this to you. It's not nice.
Well, I mean, she is remarkable because of the way she connects with readers. I mean, readers, whether you like her writing or not, I mean, her stories connect with people on a really visceral, fundamental way. And I mean, I don't know, would a ChatGPT ever be able to, you know, provoke that kind of emotional response? I don't know.
It's her stories, also the semi-soft porn aspect of some of the books, but especially if I will never.
Maybe we should go there.
I'm just saying, at the bookstore, yes, the entire front of the store, you know, 6 books on the bestseller list.
I know.
The end of us, the beginning of us, and people don't know that the beginning of us is after the end of us. And
yeah,
I just walk away. I walk back into my office. I can't handle. It was like when 50 Shades of Grey was out. This is what I do. I do all the talking. I'm not doing this. I'm gonna stop. I can just keep telling. All right. Well, as we conclude, I was thinking I would ask you a little bit about. I was intrigued by on your website and biography and stuff like that about what you do as a side job, about the form you have there and what you do for potential writers.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to work only with one person at a time, sometimes 2. But and at all stages, I mean, I've worked with people who are just starting to write novels. I've worked on like 2nd and 3rd drafts, helping people really, you know, refine a manuscript and get it ready for agents. But yeah, so I mean, as sort of a self-taught writer or I mean, I don't know. I don't have an MFA. I did not study writing in school. You know, I always read. I was always a reader, and I always loved to write, and, you know, kept a journal and would write stories to entertain myself. And a big people watcher, you know, I mean, I definitely am guilty of sitting in a coffee shop and totally eavesdropping on other people's conversations. But taking all of that and putting it into a novel, or taking all of those tendencies and kind of making something out of it, I had to teach myself and learn from various, you know, manuals and books. And when I moved to Seattle, I started taking classes at Hugo House, which is a great center here for writers. And now, since COVID, they have started doing classes over Zoom. So it's not just Seattle people that can benefit from their instruction. But I feel this, you know, real affinity with writers who are coming from the outside, you know, who are not coming from an MFA program, who are not connected in some way to the writing industry. And so those are the people who I tend to work with.
Glad I asked you that. That's great. I think people will respond to that if, as much as you have the time to be able to do it. It's funny though, right? You'll sit at a bar and you'll hear a conversation next to you and you realize I could never write that well.
I know. That's when the note function on your phone is good, because you can be like, oh yeah, let me just get that down.
That's true. But here in your book, you didn't need to worry about it because you had the community boards. You didn't have to eavesdrop on anyone.
That's true. The community boards are like prime eavesdropping, virtual eavesdropping. It's almost better.
Yeah, you can almost publish those. Well, you have. Well, in any event, thank you so much for coming by today. I really appreciate it. The book was a lot of fun. And as I said, I just, I didn't stop laughing.
Great. I love to hear that.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.